Housel. Wow. Okay, so my next guest on Open Book is Morgan Housel, international best-selling author. He's a partner at the Collaborative Fund, and he's a brilliant guy. And I told him backstage, I'm actually flattered that he's still coming on my podcast. So I want to say thank you because you are a big deal now. Okay,
always for you, Anthony. Always.
And let me tell you something. This book, same as ever, timeless lessons on risk, opportunity, and living a good life. What a companion book to the psychology of money. And I just want to remind my listeners, I got an advanced copy from your publisher of Psychology of Money, read the whole thing. I said, my God, this is unbelievable. This is going to be a bestseller. And it was. Okay. I don't know how many books you sold, but it had to be in the hundreds of thousands, if it's not a million. This new book,
not to brag, just crossed 4.5 million.
Mazel, I mean, that is phenomenal. You know what? I hope it goes to 10 million. I give it out to people. I give it out to people for gifts. I have a stack of those books. When young people come to my office, Morgan, I hand them the Psychology of Money. I'll now be handing them the Timeless Lessons, the same as ever Timeless Lessons. But I got to tell you, these books are phenomenal reads. And every time I talk to you or I listen to you or you're writing something, I'm learning something. So I want to start there. I want to start with, what is it about you and your five senses that you can see something that I'm looking at and see it totally differently than I'm looking at it and give me a new appreciation for it? It's almost like you are an art critic of money and you're an art critic of life and the observation of life, and you're able to provide insight to people that are looking at the same thing. How are you able to do that, sir?
Well, thanks, Anthony. It's always good to be back here. My wife put this together a couple of months ago where she said this as a joke, but I think there's literal truth to this. I'm not smart enough to make money matters complicated. I don't have the mental horsepower to build a complicated model, to price options, to think that I can beat the market. I'm not smart enough. But because of that, I tend to focus on stories. That's as high as my mental horsepower goes, is focusing on a good story. There's also a point here that I've been a financial writer for 17 years, and you can only survive as a writer and keep people's attention for that long if you are focusing on stories. If your financial writing is, here's what I think the Dow is going to do over the next 6 months, you're done. You're done, because nobody can do that. And there's 100,000 people trying to do it right now that you have to compete with. But if you can tell a good story that might capture someone's attention, you have a fighting chance of surviving in this industry. So I think it's those two things that kind of breeds it.
Well, and it's well said, but let's talk about attention for a second. Okay. Nobody has it anymore. Okay. Everyone's suffering in various levels of attention deficit. Yet I felt like your book is digestible. It's manageable. And I felt like a champion in your book. And I tell you why, because when I read, even though I love books, I have to admit this, I'm a little bit of a slow reader because I'm trying to, absorb everything. And when I get to the end of the chapter, I feel accomplished, but you're whipping me. Yep. I've got one chapter after the next. I've got one thought after the next. So tell us about that, because I think everyone is going to go to the Morgan Housel writing style. I think that's the only way people are going to pay attention. How did you get there ahead of us?
Well, it's true. Everybody knows the thing with nonfiction books, that the majority of nonfiction books could have been a long article. And maybe that's true for some of the stuff that I read as well. But to me, the only way to battle against that is a bunch of short chapters where you're like, make a point, try to make it a good point, tell a good story, and then be done. Don't sit here and ramble for another 30 pages with another 20 examples of this point. The best example I've seen of this is a historian named Eric Larson. He's written many books. He's a mega bestseller. His chapters are literally one page. His book, his last book was called The Splendid and the Vile. I think it's literally 200 chapters.
Now,
and you
Winston
just rip through
Churchill.
It.
Just so everybody knows,
it was about the bombing.
He wrote a book about the Lusitania. He wrote a book about the early emergence of Chicago. Every time he writes a book, and he's got one coming out about the pre-Civil War in April. Every time he writes a book, I'm salivating. He's a lot like you in the respect of history, but you're a contemporary writer. You're using history. You wrote some great stories about the past, and you plug them into the future and to the present. But there's a genius to you that I have to applaud. You are identifying for us what we need to do to be happy, and what we need to do to create some responsibility over our own wealth. And so let's say we're in the elevator together. We're just meeting each other for the first time. And I said to you, I don't have a lot of money and I want to be happy and I want to be financially secure. Morgan, what do I have to do?
Use whatever money you have to try to gain some sense of independence in your life. Independence doesn't mean you're going to retire tomorrow necessarily. It just means that you're using your money to control the time that you're going to have tomorrow. Because what's actually going to make you happy in life is not how much money you have. It's the relationships with your spouse, your kids, your friends, your family, your health, your clear conscience, your ability to sleep 8 hours a night. That's what's going to keep you happy. And if you can use your money to gain a sense of independence, where you're doing something every day because it's what you want to do, spending time with the people you want to spend with. That's the biggest sense of using your money as a tool to gain happiness. And I would contrast that with most people's knee-jerk reaction, which is, how can I buy a bigger house, a nicer car, nicer clothes, all of which I love. I'm a sucker for nice houses and Ferraris. But if you're actually going to use this as a tool to make yourself happy, it's much closer to using it for independence rather than a way to gain more resources.
You have written about this, and so I have to ask you this, but I'm going to re-synthesize it for me with an observation. I'm turning 60 in January.
No, come on, bullshit. No.
Yeah, there's a lot of work. There's a lot of work going on here. Okay, we're talking about tremendous Botox, lots of hair dye. When you get a little older, I'll teach you all my secrets. Okay, but there's a tremendous amount of work going on here. Okay, I'm not quite Joan Rivers yet, but I'll get there. Okay, but here's the thing I want to say about you. I was having this conversation with my wife. We have a decent amount of money. We live in a decent house. We're blessed with these things. Started out poor. And I had what Ace Greenberg said, a deep desire to be rich, but I also recognized, maybe it was my religion, maybe it was the grounding from my parents, that you didn't have to overreach. I don't have to prove to people I can live in a big house. I don't have to have more than you to like one up you or anything like that. Yet I live and work on Wall Street, and we both know these people. We know miserable billionaires and miserable millionaires, and they're here on Wall Street with us. And it makes me think that there's something wrong with our brains when it comes in contact with money. Definitely something wrong with our brains when it comes in contact with power, right? It's like what Lord Acton said, the power corrupts. So what is it about the human brain on money?
I think it's people are wired to seek status and not necessarily happiness. And money is such a universal yardstick of your status and your success that people are chasing it just for the sake of accumulating more. And they think intuitively, if I have more money, I'll be happy. But they're not accumulating the money to be happy. They're accumulating it to increase their status. And the problem with this is that at the tippy top even, there's always going to be someone who's richer than you or more successful than you. And, you can think, there are people who are worth $100 billion and they are ranked number 10 or number 15 on the list. There's probably some of those people who are thinking about, how did this guy get even richer than I am? There's no limit to that. And right. I think what's important here is that really what it is a competition with other people. And if you have $1 billion, but the other guy has $1 billion and one, then he wins. And then once you identify that game, that it's just a competition with other people, and you realize how stupid that game is, it's a very natural game that's been inbred in us over the years. But then if you're thinking about like, look, I just want to use this as a tool to live a better life. How can I use it to spend more time with my family? How can I use it to help my community, give some of it away, and have some nice toys for myself, but they're toys that I enjoy rather than toys that are going to show off to other people how successful I am.
So let me push back for a second. By the way, I agree with everything you said, and I'm certainly trying to live that, and your books are helping me live that. But we treat rich people differently. See, I think F. Scott Fitzgerald was wrong in that he said that the rich are different than you and me. I don't believe that they are. They have to get up in the morning. They have anxiety. They have health issues. They have all that different stuff. But we treat them differently, Morgan. We had a Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross. He was worth $700 million. He overstated his balance sheet by $2.5 billion because he wanted people to think he was a billionaire. When he was asked why, he got treated better. He was perceived differently. Why do we do that as human beings? Why do we do that?
Well, it's back to the seeking of status. Now, pretty much everywhere psychologists look, the correlation between status and happiness and like a quality of your life is very strong. If you want a higher quality life, seek status. But there's a couple ways that you could seek it. You could do it like Wilbur and try to cheat your way and like lie about your net worth. Maybe that's too strong of a word, but
no,
there's
not too strong a word. No. He exaggerates
or you could do it and
Trump exaggerates it. And then you have other people that are understating it. You know what I mean? Because they're trying to get out of the spotlight.
Or you can do it legitimately and like legitimately make money and use that to buy a Rolls Royce that you're showing off your status. Or the other way is you can do it through your love, your wisdom, your humor, your ability to help people. That will gain you respect and admiration and status as well, particularly from the people who you want to respect and admire you. Now, I think most people down in their soul, they want about 10 people to love them. They probably want their spouse, their kids, their parents, their siblings, their close friends to love them. And everyone else is kind of like an ancillary thing. Right. And you're going to gain
not in the beginning, by the way. Not in the beginning, because I have young kids. One of my young kids walked in before 100%.
Totally agree with that.
Yeah, right. They get upset. They want everybody in their class to like them. Calm down. They're not going to all like you.
See, there's definitely a thing where early in your career, I think you should wave your arms as wildly as you can to gain people's, and to gain people's attention for that, to make a name for yourself. There's a limit. There's a right way to do it. But the older that you get, you're going to narrow down the number of people who you actually want to love you. And I think that's a big thing here, that I completely understand why a 22-year-old would want really nice clothes and a Rolex and nice, and to because they're trying to seek a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a spouse, or whatnot. From our perspective, as we get a little bit older, and you're not 60, I don't believe that, but as we get a little bit older, then I think the narrowing of that really changes how you're going to seek attention and respect and status.
All right. Well, you can Google my fat ass. Okay. I was born on January 6, 1964, and I'm going to be 60 very shortly, and it goes by very quickly. And so maybe you can write a third book called The Psychology of Time, and underneath it, where the hell does it go? Okay. But let me get back to these. Let me get back to these critical, vital things. Okay. Love, greed, envy. You write with such brilliant observation of those three words. Let's start with the word love.
I mean, that's what everybody wants. The Warren Buffett definition of success, of just life success, is when the people who you want to love you actually love you. Mm-hmm. And he contrasts this with all these billionaires that he knows, and I know you know some of them too. And Buffett says nobody loves them. They have all the money in the world. They have hospital wings named after them. They have mansions, they have jets, and nobody loves them. Their kids don't love
assholes. them. They act like assholes. They're rude. They're condescending. They're know-it-alls. They're chiselers.
But this gets back to my thing of like, how do you gain your respect? You can do it with your house and your car or your plane, or you can do it through your love, respect, wisdom, humor. Humor is maybe the biggest one. If you learned that your famous comedian was actually broke, that your favorite comedian was broke, you probably wouldn't care. You're like, I respect and admire you because you're funny, not because of your bank account. But if you are looking at a private equity tycoon, a hedge fund manager, and they go broke, you're like, that was kind of all I admired you for was your bank account. Right. And I just think it's such a more durable, fulfilling way to like seek your status from those internal things rather than your money. Now, a lot of this, like money can be like connected to it. Like I, as a parent, you as a parent, I want to take the best care of my children and my wife and my family. And money is a big part of that. I want to give them the comfortable life that money provides. So it's not that money doesn't play a role here, but you have to understand the root of what you're getting is not necessarily of what you're trying to get. Is their love and respect and attention from those few people who you want to love you.
Well, here's something I wanted you to think about as a parent. Okay. And this is actually from your books, and it's integrated with my life's observation. You have to provide space for your children to fail. And it's very, very important as a parent that your children see you failing. A lot of this has been accidental for me. Of course, when I got blasted from the White House, it was a very public failure. But it had this weird effect on my kids, Morgan. It allows them to see, wow, their dad, who they, because your kids look at you differently. Like I watch these billionaires and they try to tell their kids they do everything perfectly and their life is going up in a 45-degree straight line. I read these memoirs, and the memoirs of perfect thinking and perfect life and perfect career ascent. And you're not providing any space for the imperfection of life for your children. And you're casting this weird shadow over them, and they all end up in like medical mental trauma units. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
I mean,
It's important for me
the
to show
start,
my kids, hey, I'm vulnerable, I'm weak, I make stupid decisions.
it's
And so
important
it's
because your
just
kids are going to learn
important.
about that anyways. I think every child views their parents as like a superhero because they are to
Exactly.
them.
But give
They
them
provide everything.
space.
Yes, to
Let me go
understand
to
how.
Andy. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Go
good.
ahead. I apologize. I'm sorry.
No,
Please, because
it's just
you're
it's
smarter
so
than me.
it's yeah, I think it's important. It's also important to let your kids fail, not just to watch you fail, but to let them fail. The stark example to me was the Varsity Blues, all the people who are paying to get their kids into college and cheating the system to get them in. And one of the stories that came out of that is most of those kids did not know that their parents were cheating to get them into college. The kids thought that they were doing it on their own talents and their own
Right.
their own skills. And the kids were just completely devastated when they found out that their parents were cheating because the parents did not believe in them. So letting your kids fail and making it a meritocracy for your kids, like that's incredibly important.
Really, really great insight here. Let's go to the word envy.
Envy, of course, this is the Charlie Munger thing. It's like it's the worst of the sins because you can't have any fun with it. The other sins of like gluttony and whatnot, at least you're having fun doing them. Envy is just, I think there's a big difference between admiring someone's skills and saying, I want that for myself, and envy. And I think the difference is when I admire your skills and I say, I want to be more like that, it's a positive thing. Envy is, I'm jealous of you, so I hope you fail. It has nothing to do with boosting myself. It's just pulling other people down. I think it's always a case of when there is some sort of inequality in the world, whether it's wealth inequality, racial inequality, whatever it is, there's two ways to go about it. You can promote the underdog or you can denigrate the person who's ahead. And like sometimes it seems like you're getting to the same spot, but it's a very different way of getting there. And it's the same thing with looking at other people's success. You can admire that and try to chase it, or you can envy it and try to tear it down. And there's actually a lot of the latter in the world. You see this quite a bit with like the Schadenfreude on social media when people fail. It's not looking up to your heroes. It's rooting for the decline of other people who you think don't deserve their success.
It's interesting. So, this word Schadenfreude or Schadenfreude, the German word is hot and cold, right? Schadenfreude. And it is, you go hot and cold. You get pleasure from other people's pain and you get pain from other people's pleasure. You have to think about this as a human being. This is the atavism of our brains. This is the primordial nature of our survival mechanism. So if your cave was bigger than my cave and your wife was prettier than mine, I went over to your cave, hit you in the head with a rock, and took your cave and your wife. Okay, and that's what we did 50,000 years ago. We don't have to do that anymore. Okay, and so
it's so much just like viewing everything as a competition. Everything is a competition. That's all evolution. It's just a competition for resources. And when you view it through that lens, then all these things kind of make sense. But yeah, I think you could also, we have the intelligence now as humans to take a step back and realize how dumb that game is and realize that it's going to maybe increase your status, maybe, but it's not going to increase your happiness in the slightest.
We have to override that. Okay. So unfortunately, because these are short podcasts and you are a brilliant guy and I could talk to you all day, let's talk about greed.
Well, I think it's
right
just
up
not
there with
knowing,
the envy.
Yeah, it's not knowing the boundaries of your skill is most greed. Now, I think most people, not all, but most people who engage in greed have no idea that they're doing it. What the actions that they're taking seem to make perfect sense to them. Of course, there are exceptions to that, but I think most of the time in investing, when in hindsight, you're like, oh, that was just greed. It was actually, it looked like the right decision for that person in their head in that moment. So I think it's just knowing the boundaries of your skill, of your risk tolerance. That's probably the biggest one, knowing the boundaries of your risk tolerance. Most people in hindsight, when they got caught up with greed, they look back and they assume that they could accept a 50% decline or whatever. And then they experience it and they realize they couldn't. And in hindsight, they say, if only I was less greedy and taking less risk, I could have put up with that kind of loss.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So Morgan, the magic of investing is found in two words. I'm going to say the two words. I want you to react. You ready? Compound interest. Compound interest.
But it's too simple for smart people to take seriously.
Okay,
and the magic of it is not intuitive.
So go ahead, sir. You're going to educate me. I'm not that smart. But actually, you really have to educate the super smart people because they're always trying to out trick the market. Where Buffett tells you, relax and just ride the whole thing. But go ahead.
I
Why?
mean, here's
Why do
here's
I
the trick
need to
behind
know
it.
about? I'm a farmer. I'm a fisherman. Why do I need to know about compound interest? Tell me.
Here's the trick that's so counterintuitive to even very smart people. If you are an investor, the knee-jerk question that you want to answer is, how can I earn the highest returns? That seems like the intuition. Of course, that's what I should do. And it's not. What you want to do is figure out the best returns that you can sustain for the longest period of time. Because earning 20% in 1 year is cool. Earning 15% for 20 years is magic. Doing it for 50 years is ridiculous. If you can be an average investor for an above average period of time, you'll end up in the top 1% of all investors.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not intuitive. So this is, I think, part of why indexing can make sense. If the simplicity of indexing allows you to stick around as an investor for 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, you're going to crush it. You're earning average returns for an above average period of time because that's the math of compounding. The exponent in the equation is time. That's where all the heavy lifting is done. It's not in returns. It's just how long can you keep this going for?
Yeah, amen. All right. Well, you're hitting my my sweet spot, and love everything about you. I didn't realize we almost had a fascist overthrow of Franklin Roosevelt. Had to read that in your book, same as ever. And boy, we have this interesting, amazing country that we're both growing up in and learning in. I'm down to the last part of my podcast, and it is more words. Okay, so what I do with all my authors, my production team and I, Holly and I, we pick 5 words, and then it's sort of a raw shot test. I'm going to ask you the word. You're going to respond to it. Ready?
Let's do it.
Time.
The most underappreciated driver of investing returns.
Tell me why.
Because that's the exponent in compounding. The bottom number is not doing the heavy lifting. The exponent is. If you can be average for an above average period of time, you win. You win everything.
Right. So you got to be patient. Time to me in investing is patience, right? High quality, and shut up and don't do anything. Risk.
Different for everybody, but everyone wants to distill it to some sort of formula that works for everybody. My risk tolerance is different from yours, and it's different from everybody's. Everyone has to figure it out for themselves.
Opportunity.
Rare. That's the one word. We don't live in a world in which every single person who wants to beat the market can do it. Of course not. Opportunities are going to be rare. Probably like a once in a decade thing. Are you going to have big opportunities in the economy?
Wealth.
Way more than just a number. Much closer to the quality of your relationships, your friendships, your children, your health. That's the biggest factor of wealth. And money can help those things. But the core of wealth are those things to begin with.
So I want to expound on this because I was with a guy, I was in Abu Dhabi. This guy's a contemporary of mine. His father was a very famous person that passed away. And he was remarking about another famous person that also passed away. And he lamented. He said, the son of a bitch that was a rival of my father, he had way more money than him. And I always said, how is that even possible? My father was such a better guy. And I looked at him and said, how are you measuring life? Are you measuring it by wealth or money? Because if your father had 500 friends and was loved by everybody, and to use your line now, or Buffett's line, that he wanted to have love him, and the other guy was a complete jerk off, who had the better life?
Who wins?
You see what I mean?
To me, it's so obvious. And to me, a lot of this is like the deathbed test of like when you're on your deathbed, looking back at your life, measuring how you did. What are you going to measure? Are you going to measure your net worth or the quality of people standing around your bed, whispering, "Thank you, I love you," into your ear? It's so obvious what's going to matter more.
Life.
We're so lucky to be getting to live this. Not just because everyone, me, you, everyone knows people whose lives were cut short, but just like the cosmic thing of like, what are the odds that we would live on the only planet that we have found so far that have life, and we can be this species that gets to think and communicate and share stories? Like, I guess the one word I would summarize that for life is just fortunate.
Well, if Mark Twain and Malcolm Gladwell and H.L. Mencken got together and they had a baby, it would be Morgan Housel. Okay, you got it all, baby. Okay,
I'll take it. I'll take it.
You're smart. You're witty. You're observant, and you're teaching a great many of us so many great lessons about life. We want another book already, though, Hassel. So when are we getting another book?
I'm working on it now. Let's say 2.5 years is when you'll get it.
Okay.
Books are
all right.
hard.
I'm setting the timer. I'm setting the timer in my house. Okay.
I'll be back, and then in theory you'll be 61, and I'll tell you it's bullshit, and we'll do this again.
When that bell rings in 30 months, I expect you to be right here. Okay, on Open Book. Thank you so much. Have an awesome holiday, and it's a real honor to have you on our show. Appreciate it. To have on Open Book today, Maryanne Williamson. She's a best-selling author, spiritual leader, and a 2024 presidential candidate. She's run for president before. When I say best-selling author, you've written 15 books, Maryanne, 4 of which have made number 1 on the New York Times list. The only way I could get one of my books on that list, I'd have to buy all of them, Maryanne, but I think they're on to people that try to do that, so I've never done that either.
Yeah, like someone else we know.
Well, exactly. Well, it's great to have you here. And you ran for the presidency in 2020. I always looked at that and said, wow, that's got to be an incredibly tough thing to do. Let's start there. Why did you decide? I mean, I sort of know the answer to this, but I want our viewers and listeners who may not be as familiar with you. Why did you decide to run? And listen, I think it's one of the toughest things to do in America is run for president. You know, the travel, the scrubbing that you get from the media, the thrubbing, all of that other stuff. So tell me why this brilliant, wonderful career you're transitioning into politics.
I think certain things need to be said, and I think certain things need to be done. And I think our political establishment is dominated by a conversation in which the most important things are not usually said, and the most important things are certainly not being done. Rather, the political establishment, the corporatist elements in both major parties, are enabling forces that are actually destroying our democracy. And I look around and I go, is anybody else going to run for president who's going to say this? And I didn't see anyone else coming across the hill. And I said, then I will.
Okay, so I have this theory, having been close to it, been burnt by it, and came into it relatively naive, which is hard for me to admit. You like to think of yourself as street smart and seasoned, but the world of politics is so different, at least in my opinion, than the world of business. There are different incentives, different angles of attack. But I feel like the American leadership now has totally lost the plot. They're there in this sort of fever bed of capitalism and cronyism, where lobbyists are paying them to do certain things. They only respond to you if you have money, bags of money. And if you have bags of money, you can get things done like put fertilizer into our food, overly process our food, add food dyes and different things to our food that you couldn't get done in a place like Europe, for example. Big Pharma has its way now with the FDA. The military industrial complex, we are running wars now, 50 years worth of wars. These wars are great for a very small group of people at the top, and they are very ungreat for the rest of the people, particularly the lower and middle class. And oh, by the way, if you're super wealthy and you get in trouble, it's no problem. We're going to lower interest rates, and we're going to give you unlimited amounts of capital from our treasury, so your bank can survive or you can stay rich. But we won't do that for the middle or lower income people. But what we do for them, though, is we cripple them with inflation and devaluation of our money. So if you're getting paid with your time and energy is going towards work, as opposed to you owning assets, the dollar that we put in your pocket is worth 92 cents a year later, and it makes it harder and harder for you to catch up. And so what have I missed, Maryanne? Tell me what I've missed, or did I get that wrong? These are all public servants that are serving the American public, and the policies that they're coming up with are actually working for the average American.
You were 100% correct. And the only thing that I would modify was your first sentence. You said they've lost the plot. No, they haven't. They've changed the plot. They have changed the plot from democracy to oligarchy, because everything that you just described is an oligarchic system. You described a system in which relatively few people with a lot of money get to govern according to their goal, which is short-term profit maximization for themselves. And that is at the expense of democracy. And you described that situation perfectly. I think it's letting them off the hook too easily to say they've lost the plot. They have intentionally changed the plot, and they continue to do so. And they would have the American people think that qualified leadership is people qualified in maintaining and perpetuating what is essentially that scam.
Okay, so I ask people about you all the time. I say, well, what if somebody like Maryanne Williamson was to run the government? And invariably, people say that would be wonderful if we had somebody like Maryanne Williamson, because you would be doing it to serve people. You would not be doing it to serve yourself. I mean, I've read your books. I understand where you're coming from a spiritual point of view, and where you're coming from a human welfare point of view, and from a place of kindness. So I don't want to be overly cynical, but I want to just point this out. Why can't somebody like you crack through those atmospherics? Like, why are we choosing between demented and dementia? I mean, those are basically our choices for 2024, where if you asked 80% of the American people, I really don't want demented or dementia. I would like to have somebody that, cares about where we're going and would be focused on right or wrong. Okay, so go ahead. What am I getting wrong? Why can't we get somebody like you to break through that haze, if you will?
First of all, we can, but we're going to have to rise to the challenge. I think the majority of people, Anthony, are just processing all of this. I think a critical mass on both left and right are, as we speak, waking up to what you've said here, what I've agreed with about the depth of corruption that now infuses our political system, and waking up to the fact that the institutional realities, namely public parties, which we were brought up to believe could be trusted to protect and expand our democratic pillars, are in fact the very problem in too many cases. So I think there has not been apathy. I think there's been confusion and an almost paralysis. But this is no different than in our own personal lives. If you go through something really big, you don't immediately jump into solution. You often say, wait, I got to think this through. Wait a minute. I got to think about this. And I think that's where the American people have been. It's like, wait, we got to think about this. No, we can't have her. We can't have her because she doesn't have all the, she's not a political car mechanic. And then you realize, well, no, but the problem is that we're on the wrong road. So that doesn't have to do with the political car mechanic. Well, could she actually do that? And then we go there because we've been sold that it's almost like a Wizard of Oz quality. You have to be one of them, like a Wizard of Oz. But then you realize, no, the wizard was just this guy with a mask on. We got to tear down the curtain. I'm reminded of a line from Franklin Roosevelt where he said that the primary responsibility of the presidency is not administrative, but moral vision. Moral leadership. And even when you say, can she run the government? The most important aspect of running the government at this moment is aligning the values that dominate policy back to our original values as articulated in the Declaration of Independence, which Lincoln said was an eternal rebuke to forces of tyranny and oppression. Right now, we're living in a country which is dominated by a system of economic tyranny. That is what you described. It's economic tyranny, except for a few people. So we don't need someone who's been for years involved in that system to continue to drive the car, so much as we need to disrupt that system, because the status quo will not disrupt itself.
Okay. So how do we do that? You are a visionary. You're an entrepreneur. You're a writer. You rebuilt yourself, Maryanne. I mean, maybe we should tell people about your personal story, which I find to be so American.
Yeah, it is very American.
You're the product of your own discipline and your own decision to recreate yourself, which is very emblematic to what the country sort of needs in terms of this American renewal. So let's go to your personal story for a minute. Tell our viewers and listeners a little bit about yourself and this transformation that you made over the course of your life to where you are now, and how
Well,
it could be impactful as a political leader.
Well, I think that there's really nothing unique about my story, actually. I think my story, the only thing interesting about it is that it's not unique. But it has happened. It just so happens that my career and my life have taken me to so many different corners of our society, so many corners socioeconomically, so many corners geographically, and so many corners of human experience. There's nothing special about that. There's just something so varied about that. Now, I didn't so much transform myself. I just got very lucky, Anthony. I wrote a book and Oprah Winfrey liked it. And she opened the world for me. So what that meant is I had access. Now, once I had that access, yes, I've worked very hard. I have worked very hard. And I think just as you've worked very hard, and everybody listening right now, I mean, we understand that. You have to, even if you're given opportunity, but you can't overstay what it means. And I think what I got from the Oprah experience, just as I got old enough to look back at my parents, old enough to look back at the fact that I went to decent public schools, old enough to look back and to realize what it means that there were good public libraries, old enough to look back and realize that when I was growing up, there was the minimum level of economic opportunity. I think what I've learned is that I got help. I've worked hard and I got help. And we don't give enough people, Martin Luther King said, if they give it to the poor, they call it a handout. If they give it to the rich, they call it a subsidy. You mentioned earlier, you articulated beautifully, you're rich, we got a handle. But if there are too many people locked out who have just as much entrepreneurial spirit as I've had, who want to work as hard as but people are locked out, and that's unsustainable. And that's what I've learned from my experience, is that I got help and I worked hard, but you can't leave out that I got help. And I want a society in which enough people are given the minimum help, particularly as children, that then it's reasonable to talk about them being accountable for their own circumstances because they had a shot at it. And to me, that's the American dream. The American dream is not that you can make it or I can make it or Barbara can make it or anybody else we know can make it. It's that we are responsible for a sacred trust, this sacred trust that there would be a possibility within a society of a place where anybody, if they worked hard enough, had a shot at it.
So, I mean, it's beautifully stated, and we are in a total agreement, because even my very rich friends who seem either ignorant or knowingly ignorant, willfully ignorant, or just uninterested, there is a level of the starting blocks now are so ridiculously unequal. The public school that I attended is still quite a good public school system, but frankly, it's in an affluent community. My dad was the crane operator out here on Long Island in a very affluent community. And so if you tell me the zip code of the kid, I can tell you whether or not they're getting a good public school education, right?
Absolutely.
But you and I both know that all of this is very uneven and very unfair, and we don't choose our parents. And so therefore, the country is rich enough where we could create a platform of equal opportunity for people, where there could be a package of things we provide to our citizens, whether it's healthcare or quality education, K through 12, so that they can at least get to the starting line. So
exactly.
So why the callous indifference, though? You're a very empathic person. I've read several of your books, Return to Love, the book on miracles that you wrote. Why have we grown callous? Why, if I make that a conversation piece with somebody at a hoi polloi cocktail party, they groan and roll their eyes and tell me, yeah, well, that's not going to happen, and why, if we're not careful, Maryanne, we're going to be living, the wealthy at least are going to be living in these barbed-wired security compounds.
Absolutely
like
correct.
they do
with
in
bodyguards, even to go to the grocery store. You're absolutely correct.
Correct.
All right.
So Why are we so? Why don't we want to help our neighbor like we did 100+ years ago? Where Henry Ford, bad guy. I mean, obviously a racist and so forth. But he was like, you know what? I'm going to pay these workers enough money so that they can afford the car they're making, and I'm going to put them in a house, and they're going to have a good public school. This way, they don't come after me with a tiki torch and a pitchfork while I'm trying to have my caviar in my mansion. Why are we? How do we lose sight of that?
Okay, so what we lost sight of was the power of democracy. So let's talk about this for a minute. Jefferson said that the only safe repository for power in this country is in the hands of the people. I believe that the majority of American people would agree with what you and I were saying. So when you say, how did we, everything you described was the people at those fancy cocktail parties. I'm sorry. Not every rich person is a greedy bastard. But the group of people that you're talking about who have lost so much empathy, who are living in this bubble that emotionally buffers them from the suffering that is so endemic in this society today, they should not be in control to the extent to which they are in control. That is what an oligarchy is. I believe that the majority of American people would agree with everything you and I have said. The American people are not the problem. We are a decent people. The majority of American people want our kids to go to decent schools where they're not worried about getting shot at school, where there's not carcinogens in our food and forever chemicals in our water and pesticides in our food and all the things that you've described. The problem is we have a sclerotic political system that is sitting on top of the will of the people, so that the will of the people is being suppressed. And instead, the will of the people at the cocktail parties you're talking about is holding sway because of the money that their undue financial influence. How they lost the plot, there's somebody told me the other day, there's this term, have you heard this term, ethical fading? You heard that term recently?
I haven't, but explain it to me.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's when people either they get too powerful or they get too much money or there's too much concentration on stockholder value or whatever it is in somebody's life, and they start making an ethical compromise. And it's usually not a big ethical compromise. It's a little ethical compromise, and it's just ethical fading until you've got a situation where nobody's just saying, "Hey, wait a minute, we can't do this. It could hurt a child." But I go back to what I said before, and I think this is so important. I think the majority of American people are in touch with human suffering and human empathy. The problem is the political system that does not now work to serve the will of the people. And the only way to override this, and I say this as a candidate because I've seen this up close and personal, the only way to override this is with a revolution at the ballot box. Because otherwise the system is locked up by everything that you've described here.
That's fascinating. Let's talk about Return to Love for a second, if you don't mind, because I love that book.
Thank you.
And I think you are basically, as I look through your presidential platform and watch your interviews, you're basically applying that book, to your presidential campaign. And so, and what I love about your campaign, by the way, and the reason why I wanted to have you on is if we can just get your message out there to more candidates. It doesn't just have to be candidates for the presidency, but candidates for town supervisor or candidates for the Senate or the House. It could have a transitional positive effect. It could reverse some of the trends that you're describing. So let's talk about Return to Love and applying those lessons and give our listeners and viewers a sense for what I mean.
Before I do that, if I may, you said it could have a transitional positive effect. We don't have time for a transitional positive effect. I think part of the characterological shift that is necessary at this point is a recognition of the urgency of this moment. That's number one. Number two,
fair enough. I accept that.
So the bottom line is simply that we're here to love one another. You see a hungry child, you feed them. You see carcinogens in the food, you remove them. You see somebody who's rationing their insulin, you pass universal health care. You see people who are burdened in their 20s with tens of thousands of college loan debts that should never have even existed, you cancel the debt. You see people wanting an education to better their lives, to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You have tuition-free college and tech school like every other advanced democracy. You see people who are working at jobs that they hate because it's the only way that they can even imagine being able to pay for childcare. You have subsidized childcare. You have mothers crying, depressed, and anxiety because millions of years of evolution have told them it's too early to leave the baby after the birth of the child. You have paid family leave. You have people who are 1/3 of your workforce living on less than $15 an hour, and half of them unable to find a place to live. You have a guaranteed living wage. And I also want to point out, Anthony, that everything that I just described is considered in every advanced European democracy except ours, which is not European, obviously, a moderate position. People do not realize how far the Overton window has moved from that first principle, which is that the government's job is to broker a balance between individual liberty, which includes economic liberty, and the concern for the common good. We now have the policy after policy that is passed in ways that you have mentioned to help those who have already accumulated capital accumulate more at the expense of the majority of Americans who are literally struggling just to make it at all. And the level of personal and societal dysfunction that inevitably arises from this and is arising, our suicide rates, our lower life expectancy, people dying from lack of health care, deaths of despair, diseases of despair, people's lives are falling apart. And that system does not care in the same way that you described that cocktail party. They roll their eyes at what you and I are saying. That's fine. They shouldn't be in charge. They should have the same weight of influence that every other democracy. That every other citizen. That's what democracy is supposed to be. That whether you're rich or you're poor, you get to weigh in and have the same influence. And that is what we've lost in this country. And that is why we are where we are.
Okay, it's very, very well said. And when I listen to you, I'm like, okay, that's exactly the right message with the right vision. So how do we convert that into winning? Tell me how we're going to win the campaign.
Okay. Well, I want to point out that I was just before I got on, I saw the latest poll that said I'm at 11%. The Emerson poll the other day said I'm at 10. And I'd like to, in politics, I'm sure you know this. It's kind of like when you're in elementary school and you turn 10 years old, and they say, "Ooh, you're double digits now." For whatever reason, double digits really matters in politics, right? When you consider the complete media blackout. So what Fox is to the GOP, CNN, and MSNBC are to the Democratic Party. There's been a complete media blackout. They won't have me on CNN. They won't have me on MSNBC. So even though I'm higher in the polls than, let's say, Nikki Haley or even Vivek Ramaswamy, they are regularly on the Sunday news shows. They are regularly on MSN and CNN. So what I have to do is I have to override that with bought media. And independent media, such as things, and I'm grateful to be on your show today. So I need a quick million, if 1,000 people will give $1,000 or 2,000 people will give $500. I know that a lot of this is not mystery. It's math. Do I have the money? I have the campaign. We just need to scale up. I'll have one staff member on something where I should have 3. I'll have one office when we should have 3. I'll have 2 people on a team that should have 6. It's not mysterious, but wherever I go, we get the interest, we get the standing ovations, we get all that. My problem is that too many people don't even know that my campaign exists. So the answer to your question is it's happening. It's happening despite that, but obviously we don't have a lot of time, and we need people to volunteer. We need people to go to Maryanne2024.com, volunteer, spread the word, get on social media, and obviously give financial support where they can.
Well, and give us the website just so everybody has it.
Thank you. Maryanne, that's Marianne 2024.com.
Okay. I want to go back to this era, this age of cynicism that we're in.
Yeah.
So you're not being put on. So that obviously is a material block, but that fits the oligarch narrative, right? And by the way, if
Absolutely.
Vivek Ramaswamy, and no offense to Vivek, I've listened to him. I think he's inexperienced. He doesn't have like the. You have something that we're sorely needed. You have something called savoir faire. Okay, you're going to do the right thing in any circumstance, or at least try to do the right thing in every circumstance. So, Vivek, I'm going to give him the opportunity to come on the show, as I've given all presidential candidates come on the show. But I would say this right to his face: he lacks experience and he lacks touch and empathy for people. But they put him on. They put him on because he's a person of color. Okay, and they put him on because he's not at 20% of the polls. If he was at 25% in the polls, Maryanne, they would knock him with a ray gun as hard as they possibly could. And so I guess what I'm wondering is, this oligarchical system that we have now, has it made it impossible for a reformer?
Absolutely. Because of the media conglomeratization. When I was a child, the same company could not own the newspaper and the radio and the television, because it was guaranteed, they codified it into law, that there would be a diversification of opinion. Today, we have a matrix of corporate overlords, and part of that matrix is major media empires. Now, I used to think that the political parties chopped wood and carried water for these multi-billion-dollar industries, and I've come to realize, no, they are one of those multi-billion-dollar industries. So you're right, there's a blockage, and everything that you and I have been talking about, I think this is important. The majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want universal health care. Poll after poll shows that. The majorities of Republicans as well as Democrats want tuition-free college and tech school, which we had until the 1970s. Polls show that. The majority of Republicans as well as Democrats, and including the majority of gun owners, want more common sense gun laws. The problem is they don't want anybody speaking a message like this, because they know it could start a political wildfire and it overthrows their perch. This really is a second American revolution. It's a revolution of consciousness. It's a revolution at the ballot box. But if anybody who thinks we can just continue to vote for the status quo of either major party and make these incremental changes, then it's simply a matter of whether your democracy is in a nosedive or in a managed decline.
Many issues right now. We have global issues. We have domestic issues. Take me through the top 2 or 3 domestically and the top 2 or 3 internationally that you would work on immediately.
Domestically, we need an economic bill of rights. Franklin Roosevelt said there are 4 freedoms, and 2 of them are freedom from want. They're the freedoms of speech, religion, protest, etc. And then there's freedoms from. He said the freedoms from want and from fear. 1 in 4 Americans live with medical debt. 68,000 dying every year because they have no health care. 18 million Americans can't afford to pay the prescription drugs that their doctors give them. 85 million Americans underinsured or uninsured. So we need Medicare for all, universal health care like in every other advanced democracy. We need a guaranteed living wage. Our minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. People talk about lifting it to 15, but we have in every major city in America, the living wage is at least $20 an hour. So the Economic Bill of Rights would include the things I mentioned before. And that's, of course, on my website. It's the issue of the tuition-free college, paid family leave, a guaranteed sick pay, et cetera. I also think we need to end the war on drugs. We spent $1 trillion on that since 1971. We know that Richard Nixon knew that it was not public enemy number 1. It has not helped this country. It has is actually exacerbated the problem of drug addiction. We had 300,000 people in prison when I was in college. Today, there are 2.3 million, and 46% of our federal prisoners are nonviolent drug offenders. For the $100 billion that we spend right now every year, we could spend a fraction of that money on a world-class network of recovery options. We should be treating drug addiction, which is an ubiquitous problem in this country. However, we should be treating it not as a criminal issue, but as a health issue, like they do in countries like Portugal. I also think we need a Department of Children and Youth. We have children, Anthony, who are traumatized before preschool. I have met principals at elementary schools who say that they have elementary school students on suicide watch. In public schools around this country, we have what they call trauma rooms. We're talking about trauma-informed education, but I talk about root causes. Why are so many American children traumatized to begin with? I think that America's children, because they're not old enough to vote, they have no constituency, they're not old enough to work, so they have no financial leverage, and I see them as the biggest collateral damage of this unfettered vulture crony capitalism that we have today. I also think we need to declare a climate emergency. This is the time to be ramping down, not ramping up fossil fuel extraction. And as we make a just transition from a dirty economy to a clean economy, we will actually create millions of jobs. And I think that no matter what you're talking about, whether you're talking about criminal justice issues, whether you're talking about racial justice issues, whether you're talking about drugs, whether you're talking about food, no matter what, you cannot overstate the role that economic insecurity and anxiety is playing as a root cause. And people's lives are falling apart. And when people's lives are falling apart, you're talking about large groups of desperate people. That's a national security risk. Because when you have large groups of desperate people in any system, they become a petri dish. And out of that petri dish, all manner of personal and societal dysfunction is almost inevitable, including vulnerability to genuinely psychotic forces. And that's what fascism represents in this country. Franklin Roosevelt said we wouldn't have to worry about a fascist takeover as long as democracy delivered on its promises. So the biggest problem is that democracy is not delivering on its promises. And if the Democrats do not offer a real alternative to fascism in 2024, a more inspiring agenda that viscerally improves their lives immediately, then we're going to be in terrible, terrible problem. And it could even be the end of our democracy.
You know, it's interesting because you've mentioned Roosevelt a number of times, and one of my favorite presidents for so many different reasons. But the main reason was he was a leader in the sense that he was setting a course.
That's exactly right.
Not to use a rough metaphor, but there are now thermometers. They're
That's
testing the temperature of the country, and then they're reflecting the heat or the rhetoric in the country. Roosevelt was like, okay, we got to get the temperature from 90
That's exactly
to 72.
Right. We're going to do it because I said
and
so.
I'm going to take you there, and I'm going to explain to you how to get there. And it's very famous fireside chats and the whole discussion about Lend-Lease and giving the garden hose to somebody who had their house on fire, and all of these great common analogies. And of course, he had his great struggle with paralysis. You know, some people actually think it was Guillain-Barré syndrome and not polio because he got it so late in life. There's a big discussion medically about what it was that he was actually afflicted with. But the point was he spent.
I've never heard that before. What syndrome?
Guillain-Barré, Guillain Barré, Barre syndrome, which sometimes is it's a syndrome post-virus where the body.
Yeah,
the autoimmune system attacks the nervous system.
Yeah, of course, when you think about it, the medical testing and the level of medical testing, we do know that he went to a park that day for a political rally that he felt he wasn't supposed to go to. He didn't listen to his own inner guidance, and he used a public water fountain. He came home that day, he took a nap, and basically he was never able to walk again after that.
Yeah. So again, Jay Winnick in the book 1944 was interesting because he suggested in that book that because of his age 39, it may not have been infantile paralysis because that seemed to be a disease that was afflicting people at younger ages. I'm not saying it wasn't polio. Mm-hmm. That was the the idea of it. But the reason I'm bringing it up is just that if you think of what he had to overcome as a human being and to rise to the presidency, it was monumental, but he was up to monumental tasks. And so
Well,
that's the reason why I find what you're saying and your messaging so interesting, because we need somebody monumental right at this moment who's up for this sort of monumental task.
well, it's wonderful talking to someone who shares my deep interest in Roosevelt, because there's so much to what you're saying. He was tall, dark, handsome, governor of New York. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt's nephew, a Roosevelt, a Delano. I mean, he had, he was more one of those people at the cocktail party that you described. And his having to triumph over polio, and also, or whatever it was. And then his going down to Georgia, and people who had never even heard of him, who didn't see him as a fancy person, Roosevelt, because they didn't even know what that meant at that time, particularly. They saw him just as another sufferer, and the empathy that they showed to him. There are so many ways that we can see his life experience prepared him to have the hugeness of heart and the hugeness and strength of character to show up for that moment in history the way he did. It's so fascinating. And you're right.
Yeah, listen, no,
Roosevelt. This is a moment when we need a Rooseveltian figure. Absolutely. And also, I'd like to say something else to what you were saying. When you were talking before about thermometers, I was reading the other day about the German poet Heinrich Heine, and somebody was talking to him about the fact that the old cathedrals in Europe took hundreds of years to build. And so that meant that people spent their entire lives working on a project that they knew they would never see completed in their lifetime. And somebody was asking Heinrich Heine about what force or facet of character does it take for someone to be willing to work their entire lives on something that will give them personally no particular satisfaction other than that they participated. And he said, and he was talking about the 1800s, what he called the modern age, the 1800s. Think how much this applies today. He said it's the difference between men of conviction, which they had, and what we have today, he said, which is men who only have opinions. And that's exactly what you were talking about. We need someone with conviction.
Listen, I think it's brilliant. Well, I'm a huge Rooseveltian fan, and you may have read these books, so I'm going to offer them up as a suggestion to you. Nigel Hamilton. There's been so many great biography of Roosevelt, but Nigel Hamilton decided that he would write the war memoirs, and so. Unfortunately, Franklin Roosevelt did not get a chance to write his own memoirs the way Winston Churchill did. And so he started at the beginning of the war. He took all of his documents, all of his papers. He got access to his diary, the presidential diary that his two assistants were taking in shorthand and stenography. And he put together a 3-volume series, which is it's a box set now, but it's a brilliant series. Started in 2014. Last book, I think, was written in 2019, but it really talked about the decisions that he had to make during the war, and also the illness that he was faced with, and how he picked his leaders and how he made decisions about who, the very famous one, I know you're familiar with it because I just tell by the way you're thinking of Roosevelt, the way he asked George Marshall, he felt that George Marshall deserved to run Operation Overlord, which was the D-Day invasion. But he felt more comfortable with him in Washington. He felt he needed him in Washington. And he went to him and told him, I'm sorry, I need you here. We're going to let Ike run this. And it was just this wonderful command of the English language, but this sentiment of understanding human beings and his ability to interact with them in a way where they admired him. What did Oliver Wendell Holmes say about Franklin Roosevelt? He said he had he may have had a second-rate intellect because he got C's at Harvard. This was Oliver Wendell Holmes's joke. He may have had a second-rate intellect, but he had a first-rate temperament. It was a first-class temperament. And of course, Roosevelt responded to that by saying, well, that's because I wasn't trying at Harvard. And he clearly had a first-rate intellect as well. But yeah, it's just so sorely needed today. I mean, just people that even can't even talk in complete sentences. Okay, so unfortunately, I'm in overtime. I promised to get you out of here in 30 minutes, but I'm already in overtime. So I want to go to the 5 words that I leave all my authors with. And basically, I've chosen these 5 words with my production team. You react to them. You give me a 1 word, a sentence, 5 words, whatever you want, a paragraph. So
Can
let's
I
go with
say
the
one
first
thing?
one.
May I just say
Please,
one more thing about Roosevelt? There's another wonderful book by
please.
Doris Kearns Goodwin called No
Yep.
Ordinary
No
Time,
ordinary time.
which I totally
Yep.
love. And what you just said about the ordinary intellect but the first-rate temperament, I think also was true of Eisenhower. That's number one. And also,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that they said about Roosevelt, which I think also relates to what you and I were talking about before, what he had to triumph over in his own life. So many of the people around him said, even when things are the worst, when it looks like there's no hope, and if you think this person was saying, we in the room thought there was no hope, and he probably knew so much more information even than we did about how there was no hope. He said he always left you at every meeting thinking it was going to be okay, and we were going to make it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I love it. I love it. And what an interesting dynamic. You mentioned no ordinary time. So what an interesting dynamic he and his wife had. Of course, they had their ups and downs in their marriage and more or less lived separate lives. After Lucy Rutherford and the affair that he had at the early part of his life. But the truth of the matter is they were together and they respected and admired each other. And he used her successfully politically. She used her legs to get around the country and the world, frankly, in a way that he couldn't because of his invalid status. And it's just it's a fascinating group of people. And America has always had that person, Maryanne. We had Washington at its inception. We had Lincoln at the point of breakage, when the country needed to be re-sanctified and reunified. We had Roosevelt during the Depression and the Great Second World War. And we need that now. We need somebody now. So this is why I'm so delighted that you decided to come on. So here are the 5 words. Okay, you ready?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say the word Democrat, and you react by saying what?
It doesn't now seem to be the party that I grew up with. And I think of myself as a Roosevelt Democrat, and I'm running as a Democrat because I hope for the Democratic Party as well as for the Republican Party that the parties can return to their own souls, to the high-minded principles that at one point infused them. Today, the corporatist perspective has completely taken over the Republican Party, and it dominates the establishment leadership of the Democratic Party. So when I think Democrat, I think hope that the Democratic Party will retrieve its role as it was under Roosevelt of unequivocal advocacy for the working people of the United States. And I hope the DNC will stop messing with me so that I can have a fair shot at this primary.
Yeah, that's part of the oligarchical nature of the whole thing. When you hear the word Republican, you think corporatist? What I want you to take that down the line of Republican.
Listen, Eisenhower said that the American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative. When I was growing up, more than not, there were liberal Republicans when I was growing up. And so there was a time when the Republican Party, more than not, was a home for high-minded conservative values. And the Democratic Party was the home, more than not, for high-minded liberal values. And so my hope for the Republican Party, as well as for the Democratic, is that it retrieves their souls. Right now, I have very, very little respect for the Republican Party.
Okay. I got to use this word, Biden.
Incremental. Credit where credit is due. He defeated Trump in 2020. I believe he's a very weak candidate going forward. His numbers are dropping as we speak. Even with all of Trump's indictments, the president has had a hard time even consistently breaking even with Trump in the polls. I believe his greatest service to the country right now would be to bow out, as he had said that he would, and to let a different crop of candidates come in, of which I obviously believe I would be the wisest choice.
Okay, 2024.
Decisive, critical.
And if you were to describe if you were going to describe a woman by the name of Maryanne Williamson, what would you say?
Trying my best. Decent. With the help of people and God, capable of doing great things.
Yeah, I would add aspirational. I think ultimately, for the country to succeed, we need aspiration for all people. And I think you represent that, Maryanne. I'm very, very happy that you joined me today on Open Book. I want to thank you, and hopefully I can get you back on as we get into campaign season, which is going to start to heat up here.
Thank you. Thank you.
It was a real honor for me to have you on.